So welcome! Last time we talked about elite specializations. Today, let's talk about the possibility for mounts in the upcoming Canthan expansion. So this is obviously going to be a part of the mastery system. You would expect masteries with the X-Pack, as with we've seen the other two, Heart of Thorns had a general array of different masteries. Then POF dedicated all of its masteries just to mounts. Since POF, obviously masteries do come out in the Living World as well, in the Icebrood Saga, where we've seen the devs have gone with a bit of a mixed approach, and I think that's probably what they would do when we get to Canthan. I don't think we'll get, 5 mounts all at once with POF. I don't think we'll get 5 all together. It's just going to be too many. I actually think that Guild Wars 2 in general has a cap on the number of mounts that it can viably offer us in terms of what kind of movement they have available. There's issues with key binding and UI and all those kinds of things that would start to come in if we ended up getting way too many mounts. They don't want, obviously, any new one to feel just like the Raptor, say, or which is, you know, your kind of generic movement mount. So what would they do? That's what we think for now. I suppose there is another opportunity where the devs take the stance that they will create new Canthan mounts that feel a lot like the Path of Fire ones, just so that a person who only owns the Canthan expansion gets the experience of, you know, something that jumps really high, right? Like a Springer. There's a new type of Springer. It's just like a Canthan-themed Springer and so on. The devs might do that. I don't know for sure whether they will. This is where the discussion really starts coming into matters of the business model, and whether the newest expansion will immediately give you access to both HOT and POF. We know that that's what they've got right now, right? If you buy POF, you get HOT with it, and then all the, you know, content that should unlock at the same time. But there'll probably be like a 1-year period, a 2-year period between actual release of the Canthan expansion and then the Canthan expansion giving you everything all at once. Maybe it all depends on where they go with it. That's going to affect design in a number of areas. You're going to see a lot of discussions I have over the coming years will really look and lean into that. But for now, let's just assume that they've got all of that figured out. What kinds of mounts could they go with based on lore from the original game? That's what I want to discuss here today, and there is a lot we can go into. Again, just as I mentioned with the Elite Specializations video, it doesn't have to be that they only implement pre-existing stuff in lore. I mean, what do we have? The Raptor, yeah, that kind of existed in lore already, but the Springer kind of didn't, the Skimmer kind of didn't, the Sand Jackal didn't, the Griffin kind of did, but, you know, big majestic ones that we ride around on, you know, not so much. You know, they did a mixed bag, and I think that it's probably true that they'll do a mixed bag in this X-Pack as well. So we may have a limited number of mounts, because the expansion itself might be doing mixed masteries, and we might have a, you know, only one of those limited mounts, maybe 2, that's actually a pre-existing thing. So keep that in mind as I list these out now. But let's roll on through, and I'm going to start with the big one, the main one, and that is turtles, which we're actually standing right next to here in Cavalon here. Not necessarily just turtles in general, but giant turtles, and particularly siege turtles. So what am I talking about here? Well, in Guild Wars 1, we had the Luxons who utilized these turtles, lived on their backs, traveled around on them, used them for, you know, civilian craft and even for military purposes. Particularly in some formats of the game, you could see turtles that would actually run around, you could fight, and they would have giant cannons strapped on them, and they'd shoot. They're a little bit, I guess, like primitive versions of what the Char are doing with tanks now. But even in just their general outposts, and as you wander around, you could find an enormous amount of them. And the Luxons always doing fun things. Don't forget, these were nomadic people that moved around a lot. And how did they keep all of their stuff with them? Well, by strapping them to the back of these major, awesome, glorious beasts. What's kind of funny is the actual species of turtle, whatever this is, never really got expanded on much. There wasn't really that much lore to do with them. They were more just like a piece of the setting rather than anything else. So if Guild Wars 2 did endeavor to add some kind of giant turtle-based mount where we can ride on it, they could do a lot of fun things. As for the mechanics of a mount like this, I'm not sure where they'd go. They could obviously just have it be a bit like the roller beetle again, and it's just this thing that can destroy walls. That would seem the most appropriate to me. But there is the idea also, I guess, of them maybe having it a co-op mount. We've talked about that several times since Path of Fire came out. Different opportunities the devs might have done for that. So they are so big, if they really went huge with it, then there could be a mount where you have one pilot and then everybody else sits around and, you know, maybe you can cast certain rudimentary skills off the side. Well, I guess we'll see. Don't forget that Dragon Bash is the newest festival. It was only added last year, less than a year old. And in it, we saw the devs had the technology to attach lots of players to one mower and you'd all spectate at the same time. Something like that. Maybe could work for a mount? I guess we'd see. By the way, here's another variety of the turtles. If you watch them long enough, they do... Yeah, there you go. That's good timing. That's very good timing game. They open their mouths and things. Reminds me a little bit of... There was an undead Orion kind of crab or turtle or something that you could find, remember, in 2012 vanilla release? They were always this thing always reminds me of them a little bit. They were like a weird boss structure that you could only fight in certain areas of ore. I think one of them was in the Caledon Forest. But yeah, the idea of a big turtle mount, that's got to be the top of the list and several clips above anything else, really, I think. But let's go on. So another type of mount we might see, would, just as this is associated with the Luxons of the Jade Sea, would perhaps be associated with the, and maybe we can find one at the Eternal Grove, with the Kurziks. So where the Luxons had their siege turtles, the Kurziks had these things called Juggernauts. So, this is more of an honourable mention for the list for me. I'm not sure, we'll have to maybe get into the centre of this outpost and hope we can find something. I'm currently at the Eternal Grove, which was the place where, one of the places where Juggernauts were built. But basically the idea was transforming a human, a Kurzik, in body into this great green, massive, titanic, plant-based looking creature that would, you know, swan around the battlefield and devastate things. So, if I remember rightly, there was a cool gameplay mechanic where if a Juggernaut got to a siege turtle, it could, like, flip it over onto its back and disable it for a while, all kinds of fun things like that. But they were big parts of the Kurziks, who they were, what they were doing here. There was a part of the story where, right here at the Eternal Grove, where you had to look after the creation of a few of them. But I don't think that they're necessarily that great for mounts. Now, yes, being a big green thing kind of works, I guess, for riding around on it. But here's the thing. They're like people. They're like sentient, normal, you know, except in body, people with sapience that probably wouldn't appreciate just being ridden around on. And I'm not sure that their size really works. What would it be? We're sitting on their shoulders? I mean, I can imagine an Asura sitting on some kind of bipedal creature's shoulder, but a Norn, they're so big that the Norn just hang out, you know, getting piggyback rides from them? I just don't know whether I see it. It could be fun if they really leaned into that absurdity and had really interesting animations. And I suppose the other thing that they could do is, if you think about it, when you are in Guild Wars and you hit the get on mount button, you kind of, the mount pops up out of nowhere and you're just riding on it, right? Well, what if when you hit the button, it like did a transform, almost like you've drank a tonic, and you become the Juggernaut? And it's kind of a mount, but also it's like you are the mount, you know, if that makes sense? A bit like how in Guild Wars 1, you were inside the Janundu as you utilized it. Maybe in this, there'd be a new version of Juggernaut they've figured out after 250 years where they can revert the process of being one. But then that kind of robs the idea of creating Juggernauts as a story piece of you know, their urgency and their intrigue. So I'm not too sure about that, but I did want to give it an honorable mention. The Juggernauts are maybe something the devs will do something with. Another idea, by the way, on my list, and I'll jump it up. I was going to talk about this later in the video, but they're right here. Are Rottwallows. So these are just interesting, cool, strange creatures that you could actually hire as henchmen. Like, these are allies that you could get. Usually your henchmen would be, you know, people that you speak to, and, you know, you can join them into your party, like Danica here. But here we've got Brutus, who says snarf snarf, that can actually join your party as like a pet for a henchman. I've always liked the Rottwallows. There's lots of enemy Rottwallows as well, and I think that just their design itself lends to something mount-like. I know this looks really small and weird and like not that cool, but don't forget that between the two games, they change the models, they change the textures, they improve things, they can take a little bit of artistic license and liberty, they can make these things bigger, and yeah, I can imagine riding around on Rottwallows. They're just an interesting other option if you wanted to have some kind of mount associated with the Echo Valley Forest. Perhaps an idea to think about. Another cool one that isn't necessarily associated with either of these regions, and maybe we can see one, if my memory serves me well enough here, outside of the Aspenwood Gate. Those would be Island Guardians. And by the way, a lot of the lore and a lot of the things I'm talking about here can be expanded on in the expansion without becoming a mount. Or like in yesterday's video, if you haven't seen it, I was doing this but basically about elite specializations. They can be expanded on without becoming an elite specialization. So they could be a part of the expansion, even if the answer to them being a mount is no. But, so for example, with the Juggernaut, that could be tie into all kinds of interesting Sylvari storylines, just like with the Wardens and so on. There's lots of reason to deal with this. These, here you go, my memory does serve me right. So then you have these Island Guardians. These are basically massive, I want to call them similar to Oak Hearts, right? They're plant creatures that you could find here only in Canthan. I've always thought they had a really gorgeous design, very cool things. And Oak Hearts are one of those funny things that the Guild Wars 2 team did really well improving and changing from Game 1 into Game 2. And I just wonder what they do with Island Guardians. These things are amazing. I really want to see them in expansion. Whether they're a mount or not is kind of irrelevant to me. But I think that they're kind of fitting as mounts. I like the idea of being carried around by a giant ent, basically. I mean, who wouldn't? And, well, here's an example, by the way, of some more Rottweiler. These ones being bigger. In Guild Wars 1, as your level improves, you get bigger, basically. So these ones are level 24, so they're a little bit bigger. But yeah, Island Guardians, I've always thought that they'd be pretty interesting, especially in a world where we now have mounts. You never know. The next one I want to talk about takes us back to the Jade Sea. And I guess an easy place to find them. I mean, we could just open up the Unwaking Waters mission. Actually, no. Let's not give you guys spoilers or anything like that if you guys don't want them. Maybe outside of the Seafarer's Rest. But I was thinking of maybe even the Salt Spray Dragons as some form of mounts. Now, my idea with this is not necessarily as an above ground mount. Don't forget that this sea is probably going to be melted by the time of Guild Wars 2. Let's go off on the left and see if we can avoid the Afflicted. So I'm expecting there to be a lot of underwater content, a lot of underwater gameplay, and the idea of an underwater mount is a very clean and obvious thing for ArenaNet to do because it doesn't step on the toes of any existing mounts. It's not like, well, why would I do this when I have a Raptor? Why would I do this when I have a Skyscale? Why would I do this when I have whatever else, right? Well, we have nothing that goes underwater right now. So what I'm thinking is an underwater mount that is kind of like your underwater all-terrain vehicle, a little bit like the Skyscale. So it would be another dragon to ride. It is Guild Wars 2, the game about dragons. So I think that's fine. We are also going back to the Empire of the Dragon. I mean, how the stuff we're fighting right now are actually technically considered dragons. Riding around on a rock ride dragon would be pretty cool as well, actually. A little bit like the Siege Turtle idea. But yeah, having an underwater dragon. And why would that be cool? Well, I think it works perfectly in lore. There's loads of salt sprays around. Or were at least 250 years ago. There is almost definitely going to be some kind of story dealing with Kunavang, surely, right? It's very likely that this region of the world will tie somewhat in with the Deep Sea Dragon. So there's just so many opportunities and things that lead towards the salt sprays. And if I could find you a goddamn one, I would show you. Maybe let's go north of the Leviathan pits. What you'll find as well is their movement. They're kind of like these weird floaty things that almost look like they should be swimming rather than flying. I mean, the game's always just kind of leaned on the idea that it's magic that's allowing them to maneuver through the skies in the way that they do. But it feels like they'd fit so well underwater. If not a salt spray, I'm pretty sure we will get something as an underwater mount. Maybe, if not them, then they might go with something more simple, like a shark, a big shark creature, a big dolphin creature, invent something new for themselves, whatever, right? That actually matches the movement that they're really looking for. But since in this video I wanted to look at specific old enemies and old monsters and old things in the setting, maybe a salt spray would be a really, really, really cool idea. I don't seem to be able to find any. It looks like a, well, no, that's just a tentacled monster in the Jade over there. I swear, you just got to get out into the open seas. Maybe if I run up here, if I can survive beyond these outcasts, we should be able to see them. And while I find them, I'll give you guys my last idea, really, for the expansion. And it's a weird one. This is kind of like a bonus. But something I think is interesting to look at and talk about. Now, let's talk about beetles, all right? So this region of the world was the original one to host the idea of roller beetles and roller beetle races. And so it's kind of funny then that it was during the Path of Fire era that we got roller beetles. Oh, we've aggroed these guys. And the roller beetle races got added last year, you know, around Christmas last year. And not instead with all of this kind of story. So, what else could they do with the beetles? I'm not entirely sure, but I will point out that it would be very likely to get more races, particularly around Xingji, and maybe new varieties. I mean, they tend to just do stuff like that as skins in the gem store. I've always found it quite interesting that before Heart of Thorns came out, we had the Hylic riding around on beetles, but not roller beetles, just like regular beetles. I mean, around the same time we saw the Mordrum were riding raptors, and then what happened? We got raptors. So maybe one day we'll get regular beetles, just like we saw the Hylic being in it all that time, and that will be synced up with this region of the world. You just never know. Anyway, I'm not sure I'm going to really be able to get to Assault Spray for you guys, so I'll just throw an image up on screen for you guys to have a look at one here. It's only because I don't really have all my heroes set up. I've just taken these random henchmen out. Hopefully, if we're lucky, it'll be one of these roaming packs over this hill. No, it's not. But a good sampling of all the really weird and interesting creatures that were roaming around out here. And like the Irukandji and stuff. And we'll probably find now, 250 years later, swimming. They could do some really interesting things. And I can't wait to see. So there you have it, guys. That's my thought about the mounts that could be coming with the new expansion. There is obviously the idea of masteries in general and what they could go with there. Heart of Thorns was certainly very ambitious and creative about the things it wanted to do. Then POF, it was purely mounts, but maybe now we can go back to some really interesting masteries. Not like disappointing, slightly uninteresting ones like the Living World tends to give us, but expansion caliber masteries that aren't just mounts. And maybe that's where we could get things like fishing. I'll probably save those discussions for another day, though. So thanks very much, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Oh, man, I can't wait to come back here. Let me know if you've got any cool ideas for mounts yourself. And until the next time, have a great evening, guys. Don't forget, I've got lots of fun other things going on. Please feel free to check out my Stellaris series, my arena stuff. Catch up on Living World Season 2 if you haven't just yet. And, well, I'll be back very shortly. Cheers, guys. Take it easy.